Right, I'm here for another episode of Thorinquiry, which is my interview series here on my side channel. And this episode is going to be with Quintus Curtius, which is the pen name of an author on topics like, I would say, like philosophy. Seems like you have an interest in military history, to some degree, history in general. How do you characterize yourself, Quintus?
Well, Quintus Curtius is a pen name. My real name is George Thomas. And I consider myself a translator, a writer in subjects, historical, literary, moral philosophy, things like that. But thank you for having me, Thorin. I appreciate it.
No problem. Yeah, I mean, I will just say for people who are interested in checking out some of your work or the sphere that it's in, the piece that I actually found out initially was, I think it was the On Moral Ends book. That was the one that I initially found that was quite interesting. So one of the things I thought would be interesting in this discussion is if people have seen Quintus's Twitter, he very much comments on topical things now, the political landscape now, and does so, I would say, I mean, this is what we'll get into, from almost sort of a wistful perspective of days gone by, which I'm very interested to get into. But then simultaneously, that parallels with, you seem to have this deep interest in antiquity and what things were like at other periods in history. So what I will do on this show is, my style is I just like to ask essentially fairly wandering questions, and then you just take whatever you pick from it. I'll leave them somewhat open-ended, and you just run with it and you give me your thoughts, basically. So one area I'd actually like to start out with, just a very quick question. It's because I think actually in the modern day, if people are going to talk about politics or history, this is an interesting question to ask. Are you religious, Quintus? Are you Christian? Do you identify in any sense with a tradition like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up as a Catholic, so I kind of inherited, just through osmosis and family practice, just those traditions. It's not. I wouldn't say that it's a major motivation for what I do or the focus of my writing, but I value it as I value it for the tradition that goes along with it, the moral code that it imparts, and I think everyone needs some sort of religious pageantry in their lives to some extent, but it's not a major. I consider myself a secular writer, not a religious writer.
Sure. I mean, the reason I ask, and I even set it up in that sort of almost curious manner, is because I actually do think a conclusion I've come to in the last few years with my own reading is I used to be one of those people who was like a young, let's say like a lapsed religious person who became an atheist. And I used to believe all that rhetoric of, you can just separate out all the good ideas and you can be secular and you don't need any of this like tradition and stuff. And I actually now think I've done a 180 on that, man. Like I actually think now, even though it seemed at the time like a very convenient position for people to claim, I kind of do think these traditions they don't just stem from religious background, like they're almost inherently interwoven with it, it feels like. Right. So, I mean, in your particular case, if people think of how you talk on Twitter, they would characterize you probably as like a classical conservative, I'm going to guess. But to me, what you said there is more interesting, is the idea that you value tradition, right?
Absolutely, Thorin. I agree with everything you just said. I think I've always kind of taken the position that religion is everyone needs, every healthy society needs to have some sort of religious structure to it, and to some degree, because you can't impart a moral code to the youth. You can't transmit I think these important social values and personal values with any other mechanism. I think the learned and the educated and the very independent minded can I think sort of learn these things on their own, but that's a very small minority. People need, I think all people need some sort of sustaining faith to console them in their bereavements, to give, to provide some sort of supernatural consolation for tragedies that happen, and also some hope to some degree for some sort of afterlife, because otherwise, what are you going to tell people? You're going to just tell people that life is just a we're just a collection of atoms and molecules that means nothing, and it all ends in annihilation. Once we get past 80 years old. I mean, I just think that's a little bit dark, and you need to give some. There needs to be something more, and I think that's why there's always been religions, and there always will be them, because they serve a human need. So I like that. That's how I see it, and I think there is a lot of value to it. It really, maybe not when you're younger, but when you get older, you see the social utility of it.
Yes. I mean, another thing, look, it's a bit of a loaded question to ask someone who literally translates ancient texts and books like this. Like, I'm not really sort of asking something controversial here, but I would even also say another reason I'm very interested, and always have been actually, in antiquity is it might be in my own perception of this, but I think I have a different perspective to a lot of people. A lot of people seem to look at education as a sort of formalized discipline where you must like sort of get through certain checkpoints, and there's essentially, it's the notion that like you couldn't really figure it out yourself. Someone else has figured it out, and here's sort of, they're going to give you the breadcrumb approach. Here's step one, here's step two. I actually think the opposite, man. I wonder what you think, because I actually find in life, at the risk of sounding arrogant, I actually think the only thing that seems to bar me from being able to understand ancient texts is just when essentially the language is a bit different than I'm used to, or they use a term I'm not familiar with. I actually think that whole thing in the modern day where they want you to sort of read like a modern day scholar's version of what he thinks the book was about, I feel like that's a dead end, man. Like, to me, the reason I enjoy your work, for example, is I feel like when the ideas are written in language that makes sense to me, the ideas come immediately through. It doesn't matter how many thousands of years separate me and the people. Like, if anything, it's the idiot in the middle who's just coming from a university with his own agenda now who's going to sort of lead me down the wrong path. I feel like almost anything, if you're an intelligent person, you can sort of engage with it directly. What do you think?
Absolutely, Thorin. I think that's a great point, and I've always believed the same thing. One of the reasons that I started doing translation was for that very reason that you just hinted at, was because I was very frustrated at the quality of the translations that were out there available to us. Guys like you and me, they were, for the most part, most of them were done in the 19th century. They seem to have been done by specialists for other specialists and not for the common man. And when the irony of it is that a lot of these ancient texts were written for the common man. They were written for normal, guys like you and me, not for professional specialists. Right, exactly. So these dialogue, that's the whole reason why the dialogue format was created in many ways. But over time, a lot of these university quote professionals have taken on the role of sort of this gatekeeper mentality, where you need sort of this academic credentials in order to access the inner citadel, and that's just not true, Thorin. It's just not true, and I'm very glad to hear you say that, because that means that I feel like that there are people that have been responsive to this intent this approach that I've tried to take, that when you go about translating, you use modern language. You don't need to use these labyrinthine sentences, this 19th century vocabulary and syntax. All it does is piss people off, frankly.
Yes.
It does, and there's no need for it. There's a way to convey the flavor of antiquity without wrapping people in cobwebs of obfuscation. There's ways of doing it, and I will continue to try to do that. It's very frustrating, because I think that mentality has turned off a lot of young people to a lot of these works that they're very easy to. It does not take you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand Cicero. That's a myth. There's nothing going on here that's extremely complicated. You've got to pay attention. Okay, you've got to, maybe follow the, you got to have a general idea of what people are talking about. But that's what the introduction is supposed to do, is sort of, help you get to that point. So I agree with you, man. I don't know why more of them don't get it. I don't know why a lot of these guys, I think, and it comes back to what I experienced when I was in college too. There are some people, they just like to make things harder than they need to be, to make them feel better about themselves. It's an ego thing, man. It's an ego thing. And it's very unfortunate.
Because along these lines, another thing I want to ask you about, one thing I enjoy very much about your Twitter persona, at least, is like, I like the way you've built your own terminology up. Like, people, they'll know if they read your Twitter about the nibblers and all that sort of thing. Like, one thing I like that you've done, because I've done this myself, but for different reasons, I do it essentially so that I can say things or refer to people without using terms which are too loaded now or just would be too obvious what I meant. I want sort of the inner circle to know what I mean. So the question I have is this along these lines. I also get the vibe when I look at academia now, that another reason why they want to be between you and anything that actually is just sort of essentially legit material or has like a vibrancy to it, they want to get between and sort of tell you how to think about it. Yes. It's because I've noticed one of the approaches, what I always try to do, this is why I'm also interested in your work, mate, is I try to look at the people, either my enemy or the people who think they are my enemies, along like tactical, strategical lines and ask myself, like, strategically, what is the bigger picture agenda they're trying to do? Tactically, how are they actually getting it done? And one thing I've noticed, I want to ask you about as someone who's tangentially related to academia, is it seems to me like one of the cleverest move that a lot of the left-wing academics, I mean, it's an ultimate tautology, just academic people, one of the main tactics they seem to use is they pretend that they're just someone who's questioning everything, which is a brilliant idea, of course. What a great intellectual pursuit, right? Trying to break everything down, ask, is this true? But what you quickly find out is they've actually got the most set idea and structure of how the world is and how it operates and what's good and what's bad and what's more. And really, they're just trying to break down your structures. And then it's not afterwards that we reach the utopia and we can all, as they pretend, express ourselves in any way, take on any identity. No, they have in mind a very set approach. It's just they have to sort of clear the deck first so they can bring all this bollocks on board. What do you think?
Yes, sir. I absolutely, Thorin. I've noticed this has been again. You're hitting all these great points that I've also. It's amazing how many kindred spirits there are out there when you really probe into this stuff. But yes, a lot of academics, in my view, now, they don't want to just present the material in a neutral, dispassionate form. They want to tell you what to think. They want to reinterpret it as in a form that conveniently dovetails with modern, I think, leftist sensibilities. And they don't want to accept the writer on his own terms. They want to tell you what to think about this writer. They want to skew his language in ways that benefit their vision. And look, to some extent, I think, maybe everybody does a little bit of that, but it's gotten to the point. It's gotten to the point, Thorin, where it's just the divergence between what the writer says and what the academic gatekeeper says he says is just extremely wide. Right. And you don't need a filter. You don't need an interpreter whispering in your ear, Thorin, when you're reading a book to tell you what to think. You're, like you said, you're a sensible, reasonable man. You're literate. You read. You don't need someone to tell you what to think. And this is what I really resent, is that and I think the danger is we're going to get to a point where they don't even want to show you the original works anymore. Yes. They just want to just comment, or they want to just talk about the works or their interpretation of the works without giving you what the works are. And this is the danger. This is the real danger, and this is why we have to be vigilant about these things.
Right, I did give you the preamble before we started. Like, my style is a bit wandering. I do just sort of go from thought to thought. You'll see the theme, but don't worry, skip anything that seems unnecessary. What I'll do is to set up my point, I'll say this, right? This might sound strange, but recently in my field, a massive discussion, it's quite a boring one, mate. It's one that every field has, eternally, it's just the nature of the longhouse, is what is the role of women in esports? And so you can imagine a lot of that was having discourse with women about these topics, right? And one of the things I actually found, Quintus, was if you just battled people on the point that they chose, well, they already have their arguments prepared. Usually they're actually quite set in their ways and not really interested in what your point is. They're just waiting to find a hole in it to go say, I was right anyway, and they don't have a discourse. They essentially skip a discourse. So what I found was way more interesting and made a lot more sense and got a lot more, I would say it was a more efficacious approach, was instead I would just try to talk to women and just find out essentially not what the points are, what is your experiences? Like for example, if you're a woman who says you're being harassed, like in what ways were you harassed? Like what happened to you? What was the experience? Because what I've found is when you take aside all the argument and all the artifice, if you just know people's experiences and what they went through, a lot of what they do makes sense, and suddenly they become very rational people, or you can even understand emotionally why they'd react a certain way. So I want to do a similar approach, right, and ask historically, because as you said there, another thing you hinted at that is probably my biggest annoyance in modern academics is when they take some fabulous, like incredibly profound, poignant work from thousands of years ago by someone who, even by modern standards, would be considered a genius or like amazing thinker. And then they reduce it and they sort of essentially say, morally, of course, he's totally wrong and an arsehole, isn't he? And here's why. And then they're sort of like above him in some condescending position. And what I would ask is this, Quintus, I think we can be brave on this podcast. I'd flip it the other way, mate. I'd go this way. I don't do that mealy mouth thing of like, well, you know, you can't judge them because the times were different. I'll flip it the other way, mate. Who the fuck are these academic nerds pushing a pencil around to judge like some warrior philosopher from thousands years? Because there's one thing I really want to discuss with you. To me, my experience of the moral dimension of the world is people think it's just ideas in which you think are right and wrong. I genuinely think, mate, they are just ideas when all they're doing is like bobbling around in your head. Like, to me, you actually only know what you morally think based on like your actions, based on things you do in the world, actually engaging with it, being wrong, being right, trying things, figuring out what you start. I think actually, essentially, if you're going to tell those people they were immoral, Quintus, I think you're sort of telling them they lived their life wrong, even though you don't know how they lived their life.
Yeah, you know, man, I mean, these are deep waters, you know, and I try to be, you know, maybe it's just a product of my job, you know, because I'm a lawyer. My actual profession is, and I have to, a lawyer, so I have to meet with clients, and you have to hear their stories, and you have to kind of find solutions. Everybody brings to the table, Thorin, their own experiences and their own perspectives, and to some extent, I get that. I can respect that. But you're right. I think there's a level of glee and malicious glee, maybe is the right phrase, that a lot of these commentators they want to knock the ancients off their perches or the medieval thinkers off their perches, and they want to substitute their own, I don't know, you know, their own comment. And I think, you know, to some degree, okay, I can get that, but you know, there has to be respect. You know, I think we lose sight of the fact that so many of these great writers, like you said, these geniuses, these were just normal people. They had struggles, they had strengths, they had weaknesses, and we have to see them. We have to see them for what they were. And like you said, it was with a lot of these writers, you want to throw down their books and say, well, who the hell are you to judge somebody? What have you done? You know,
exactly.
What's your track record?
Yes.
You know, so it's a lot of these guys, man, they want to knock an established name off his perch. And but this is the thing, they want to replace it with nothing.
Yes.
And so, you know, so this is, look, there's a real, I think what we're getting at, what seems to be, we're sort of hovering around the point, maybe that there seems to be a real malicious glee that our academic priesthood takes in just slinging mud at the great names of the past. You know, it's almost reached pathological.
Oh, it has, yeah.
Dimensions. It's pathological now. You can't even talk about any name. I mean, even the BBC, which is
yes,
you know,
exactly.
I respect. I'll log on. I'll read the articles, but you know, it's just, you know, every name has to, now we have to hear
Yes.
about, what they did and bad things that Sir Edward, whatever last name was, Sir John, whatever, some guy, he said something mean about somebody, or he did something mean to someone in 300 years ago. And so that means we should just write him off, and he's just a horrible human being. And it's very sad because it's an attack on both of our countries.
Sure.
This mentality is it's a pathological attempt to re-engineer the present to deconstruct the past. And I don't know. I don't know what to say. All we've obviously the previous generation has failed to educate a cadre of young men and women who respect their heritage. Someone along the line failed. Someone dropped the ball.
Yes.
And it wasn't us. I don't know how old you are, but it wasn't our generation. It was the generation before us.
Yes.
You know.
By the way, just to spit on the other part I was talking about, what do you think about the idea I had about the moral dimension? Essentially, to me, I think in the modern day, because it's part of the ambience of being able to judge people, everyone acts as though we all roll out the womb with like the correct progressive morality, and that everyone agrees this is the right way to live. I even think that's tied into what we're talking about, mate. Part of the reason they think they can dismiss the past is that dreaded term progress implies every new idea is right, which is, if you've ever lived life itself, it's just the most stupid concept of all time. Like, anyone who has any kind of background in like engineering, for example, would know there are concepts and techniques that have worked for thousands of years and that will continue to work no matter what you come up with now. So what I would also say is that I don't even agree with that premise, progress, mate. I think in some areas, this is why I love the work of antiquity, I think in some areas it's regressed. So what would you say to that aspect of moral idea? Because to me, I think everyone thinks they know what their morality is. But in my opinion, when you're just thinking about it, it's all you're really doing is you've sort of outsourced it to culture. And like I said, to me, it's only when you sort of actually directly engage with life, with scenarios, with essentially you have to test your morals to know what they are, I think.
Absolutely, Thorin. I 100% agreement. I think there's no question that we've, quote, progressed, or I say technology has certainly, we have more gadgets and advancements, obviously, in the ancients, but we've certainly unquestionably regressed in terms of moral training. And this is something that becomes very, very clear once you get exposure to a lot of the classical literature. It's obvious because in those days, you had, men and women were trained they were trained physically, they were trained with in terms of the virtues, and they were also given moral training, the meaning of right and wrong and how to cultivate the virtues. And that doesn't even exist anymore now. It doesn't even exist.
Yes.
Not only has it regressed, it has literally been vanished from, and not only that, but there was also, in centuries past, there was a religious structure, institutions that also reinforced a lot of these this moral training, which again, it doesn't exist anymore. So this is why, and I've written about this not just in my earlier books like 37 and Pantheon. I've gone into great detail about the moral training of the youth. This is a subject that's very important to me, and I hope. I think it's unlikely.
I feel like your book on duties would be a good one to shout out if people want to check this out.
Absolutely, yeah. We're going in our lifetime. I think the only hope for the future, Thorin, is maybe private institute. You're not going to get it in the public.
I actually wanted to talk about this topic if you want to segue into it. So I had a similar question, which
you're not going to get it from the public school. You're not going to get it from the state-run schools because they don't want you to know about it, because they want you to believe their garbage, their tripe, their nonsense. They want to indoctrinate you with their worldview, which is that of a idle, mindless, useless shit.
Yes.
This is what they want. They want it, and it sounds so sinister, but it's true. I don't see how anyone can look at the past 3 years, and have any doubt that there is an agenda out there, and it's the same whether it's in England or whether it's in the United States or whatever. I don't know what other Western country. Probably most of Western Europe is the same.
Yes,
although,
absolutely.
Since we're both English speakers, you see it. I mean, what's happening in America and England is the same thing simultaneously. We're under attack.
Yes.
We're under by a pathological elite that doesn't believe, that's lost its moral rectitude, for lack of a better word. And I think Kenneth Clark, who I think he was a Cambridge Don, who did a great series in the 60s on civilization.
Well, it's mega.
I can't remember if he was an Oxford Don or a Cambridge Don, but he said that once a culture loses its confidence in itself, then it's in big trouble. And this is what I don't like. I think England should be very proud of its history.
Sure.
I think Britain should be very proud of its history. I think America should be proud of its history. And we're there's nothing wrong with this. This is the way it should be. So I hope that future generations will recover these values, because, man, the baby boomers did a terrible job of transmitting it to us.
Yes. I mean, like I said, we can segue. This is a great topic I also did want to discuss, which is another thing I've noticed, especially when you take part in Twitter discussions, is you do sort of like, I don't know if you do this intentionally, but it does feel almost like you mold yourself as like an uncle in like the, whatever you call it, the manosphere or whatever the fuck people term that stuff, because your take usually is sort of more like, oh, we used to do like this, or you can. So one thing I want to ask you about is, I know one thing you have a lot of respect for is the concept of like institution, like fraternity, as it were. And this is something which, I mean, I can tell you, again, there's another thing I've studied my enemy. This is something absolutely by agenda was done in society. I mean, one of the clever things they did using the pivot of feminism was destroy all men's clubs. I mean, since I know you're an appreciator of the Anglosphere, Quintus, I can tell you right now, I could paint a picture for you that you will immediately understand, but that a modern day kid who comes from my area wouldn't. So let me paint it for you. When I grew up as a boy in northeast England, I am 39 years old, by the way, just so you have the time frame. So we're talking about the 80s, the early 90s. At this time, not only my male relatives, but all male relatives in my working class area, after they finished work and had their dinner and met the kids and the family, they would go to a working men's club, it was called. And essentially, I'm just explaining this for the fans, obviously, and the casual people who are listening. It essentially is like a sort of like a semi-private bar where the reason it's a club is you want to keep dickheads out, obviously, and people who are annoying. And the vibe is you go there and it's sort of halfway between a total, entirely public pub approach and just having a drink with your mates. And it essentially becomes something like a social club. And, you'll have like a curry night and a fucking darts night and you'll watch the match there. And the idea is it's genuinely just somewhere that men can go, adult men who work a job and who have to deal with all the bullshit of life and just get away from all the rest of the bullshit of life, like their wife or their kids or their job, and just go somewhere and just be men for a few hours. And this might sound to someone now like, what's the big deal? But like, genuinely, mate, I think that missing and the fact that nothing seems like it's coming down the pike to replace it, that feels like that's just like someone took, at least in my childhood, like that's like someone took all the all the pillars that were holding up the temple down, as it were. It's going to collapse in on itself. What do you think?
Man, it's just it's exactly what you noticed. That trajectory of the decline of men only spaces is paralleled by the exact same trajectory here in the States.
Right.
I could tell you I'm a little bit older. I'm 54, but we're generally in the same at least universe age wise, I suppose. I hope. But the decline has been precipitous and it's been steady and it's been deliberate, Thorin, because men only spaces are a threat to the implementation of this Marxist ideology that they want to force on everybody. And a way to do that is to separate you from your traditions. They don't want you to talk to that 65-year-old gentleman at the men's club, or they don't want you to mix with the old paratrooper who was fought in the Falklands, or they don't want you to mix with some 80-year-old Second World War veteran. You might get dangerous ideas.
Yes.
And whether it's deliberate or not deliberate, it almost doesn't matter because the end result is the same. And so there's been a conscious and deliberate effort to re-engineer our societies to suit the agenda of this sort of, plutocratic world where there's a supranational elite that calls the shots. Yes. and that basically exists above the nation state entity. and we're all just supposed to be consumers and Duracell batteries that just are there just
Yes.
to, make them continue their profits to flow, and our standard of living is going to go down more and more slowly, of course, so we don't notice it. But it's amazing, what you talk to the clubs. I mean, I remember when I was one of my favorite books. You may have heard of Boswell's Life of Johnson, Life of Samuel Johnson. It was written in the 1780s.
Okay,
but it's a great book. James Boswell, Samuel Johnson was like a very famous figure in English letters in the 18th century, and these two guys were in London, going, and they had men's clubs back then, and they had rules. You had charters to these clubs. These were like serious clubs. I mean, these were not. You actually had rules, and you had to show up once a week and
dress codes, everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I mean, this is where the British always have these great traditions that you guys have, that we just these really great. You would have to. I mean, the bylaws are written with humor and with wit, and you had to show up, and there was like a rotating alderman was elected, and you had to collect dues, and I mean, it was just a very nice tradition that, and you say to yourself, my God, you can't even get people to join a freaking, you can't even get people you can't even get five guys together for a freaking glass of beer these days.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, the joke nowadays, mate, you've seen how it is. Adult men nowadays talk like they're the neurotic housewife. Like, oh my God, I got an incoming call. I normally just use WhatsApp. Like, bloody hell, mate, just press the button and say hello. You know what I mean? Like, because along these lines, like another thing I've noticed from the way you talk online that this plays right into is another thing about masculinity that just does not exist anymore is, man alive, why are men just so sensitive, mate? You know what I'm talking about. Like, because they've never been hazed. Not only have they never been hazed, so they've never learned, like, essentially break your ego down, like, be part of the group. So they're always some sort of weird, fucked up, like, postmodern, like, distance from everything, where everything's like, he's having an ordinary one today. That weird, like, shitty perspective that seems to come out, like, I always blame it on, like, Chandler Bing from Friends, even though that in itself is, I know that's a fucking boomer reference in itself, in it, but, and the other thing, though, I wanted to tie into this is, the other thing that they cannot handle is this, even though they themselves can't take any disrespect, mate, they dish it out 24/7, young men. 24/7. Whereas again, let's just put ourselves back in that picture I painted for you. You can imagine, mate, when I went with male relatives to these men's clubs, I would not have dared say a fucking word to the like 55-year-old, fucking gaffer from a construction site that was there. Like, I would have been very polite to him. I even would have sort of on some Madden level, because let's be real, I know he could kick my ass, so that, not only that, my relatives would let him because that's the setting to do it. But it's essentially like, the joke is they don't even have to tell you in that setting what the rules are. You just very quickly figure it out, if you know what I mean. I feel like that's just gone completely. That doesn't seem to exist.
The higher, yeah, absolutely. God, man, I'm really glad that I talking to you, because you sound like a kindred spirit. I really love it. It's so true. No, man, these types of behavior. See, males. I think the thing is, males. Human males are all basically. They need to interact with each other to establish, kind of a modicum of behavior. Like, everyone kind of knows their place after a while. And when you take that away, like you said, a lot of these fucking guys, they don't even know how to talk to one another. They're hypersensitive. They behave like little girls. They're hypersensitive. They're thin-skinned. They have all these catty sort of, hissy behaviors, feminine behaviors. And, I tried to, and I'm glad to hear kind of how my Twitter comes across, because I'm glad that's kind of the intent that I was. Right. That's why I've always been a big, and this may be unrealistic, but, I think having a draft, having universal military service would at least get these guys, even for 12 months or even 6 months, maybe, just getting them together, throwing them in the mix together will teach these sons of bitches how to get along.
Even just the boot camp would surely help, right?
Boot camp, yeah. Because let's face it, some of these guys need a thumping. They need to get smacked. And I know in the old days, people guys hit each other. I mean, that was just, I mean, I'm not saying that needs to prerequisite, but let's face it. I mean, some of these guys need to kind of get readjusted. They need to learn a little bit about the way the world works.
Yes.
And this side, and then as you said, the British. I mean, they were tough. I mean, they'd hit you, man. And you don't mess around at these places. You go to some of these pubs. You start mouthing off. You're going to get an attitude. You're going to get an attitude readjusting very quickly.
Yes. By the way, along these lines, another thing I wanted to ask you about was, because I've also heard that take you have, which is actually quite a popular take, I'd say, in my opinion, in the more interesting political domains. It's when you forget stuff like, am I on this party or this other? It's like, how about question the whole philosophy? How about ask if the entire premise is a joke? So, for example, one thing that people have suggested is maybe like citizenship or certain benefits in society should be tied to undergoing some sort of military service along these lines. I mean, I would spin it this way, mate. This is what I would ask you is, to me, if I'm drawing sort of the more essential question out of this topic, one thing I want to ask you about was, I feel like another reason why men, and obviously I can only speak about men because that's the position I'm coming from, one of the reasons why I feel like men very much have lost their ways, there is no connection to real life for most men. As far as I can tell, most men live permanently in a state of abstraction. They're either doing some sort of an office job, or they're pushing buttons, or they're just talking about something which is about something which is about they're never actually directly experiencing anything. So that could be as simple as, like back in the day, the land itself, like till the land, work the land, engage with animals, with nature. Because these things, when you do this, they're another great way of just cutting through the bullshit, aren't they? Like, you can have all sorts of brilliant abstract ideas in the city in your mind about how life should work and but I tell you what, mate, again, I've got relatives that were farmers, mate. Just try going and being a farmer. Like, the joke is, there's no argument to make. If you fuck up, you don't get any food and you die. Like, it's actually in a sense, it's harsh, but it's a very brilliant system. And I feel like inherently society just has no connection to that aspect anymore. In fact, sadly, if you look in the modern political rhetoric, the people we shit on are all the people that do all those essential jobs, the real essential jobs,
No, that's a great way of putting it, man. That's what you just, I really like that we live in a world of abstractions and not that's true. You're right. A lot of guys, and let's face it, I mean, it's almost unavoidable for most of us. I mean, I work in an office job, but you're right. If I didn't make an effort to get out of it and to try to participate in physical activities, like, with other guys, I mean, you're right that you become farther and farther removed from reality. And this is true. You need to have some, exactly just like you said, you need to have some activity that ties you to something, like go on an expedition, or like till the land, or raise whatever animal husbandry, or orchards or whatever. And we don't have that. A lot of guys don't have that. And man, it's, we've got to, I just think at some point we're just going to have to, we need to make these problems are not going to be solved without major readjustments to society. And I just hope that, in the coming decades that, and I think it's probably going to have to happen, because at some point things are going to be so screwed up. The men are going to be so soy, for lack of a better word. There's going to be so much soy and so much, complete abdication of male responsibility that something's going to have to change. It's going to have to.
By the way, haven't you noticed that's also something we could segue into? In the world in general, it feels like at the moment the only disagreement most people have is who should they blame? But it's never about them taking responsibility. That seems like that's another element of what you appreciate about the ancients, right? It was all about the idea of, like, essentially you set the intention of what you're going to do, and you accept that you're the one who has to fail and overcome certain things. I mean, basically it's part of what philosophy is.
You got to pull yourself up. That's right. And that's what if you really look at, I just finished last year, we Tusculan Disputations, that whole book. It's about curing, depression and anxiety and how to overcome grief and sorrow. The whole thing is basically reduces to, you got to do it yourself, and here's some techniques, and you got to suck it up, and you got to deal with it. But honestly, Thorin, has anyone given any better advice than that in 2,000 years? Yeah, nobody's given any bloody better advice, because there isn't any.
Yes.
There isn't any fucking better advice. You've got to do it. I've got to do it. Everybody's got to do it. There is no blaming. Yeah, I mean, that's the harsh reality. It's never, and that's why all we can do, we can, the very fact that people like you or me are thinking about these things and talking about them says that, we have the opportunity to influence others. I mean, you can interact with other guys where you are. I can do the same thing. We can do it. It is going to happen. It's going to have to.
Yes.
It's going to have to happen because there isn't any other fucking alternative. But you got to try to balance. And you're right. There is a lot of nostalgia. I think there is a lot of wistful, as you said, the great word there. There's a lot of wistful nostalgia in the things that I tweet. And I guess part of it, maybe I'm just a sentimentalist, but I feel like if I can show these younger guys what things used to be like, even in my lifetime, then maybe that will trigger something in them to look deeper and to see something that maybe they didn't notice before. And if we can do that, then we will have accomplished our goals,
Another thing I want to ask you about is obviously another side of your work. I mean, it just goes hand in hand with if you're writing about that time period, is things like military histories and people who are great figures in history. And whenever you're getting into this sort of a topic, one thing I want to ask about was the reason why I related it there to concepts like, even in my own life, when I went into this working class club, I knew if I said the wrong thing, literal physical violence would be wrought upon me in that instant. And as you say, no one else would bat an eyelid. If anything, they'd just sort of go take your lumps and just fucking get on with it. Like that was like essentially what I'm trying to get to is I used to think war and talking about war, I used to think, oh, that's just another hobby. It's an abstraction. It's like, that's actually essential. Like essentially what you, again, if I draw the essence out, every man on some level must understand what violence is, the nature of violence, and the fact that it will always not only exist, but at times, and this is essential, be a necessity. Like, there's an example, by the way, of how lost modern philosophy is. I myself even used to just parrot lines I never thought about, like, well, violence is never the answer. And then I had to sit down and go, well, then what do you do when the guy comes in with the load of guns pointing at you? Like, someone's going to have to be violent to restrain this. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, again, it's another area where we're not even connected at all to those topics. Like, here's the genius of it, mate. Back in the past, everyone will remember the early war movies. One of the main central themes they tried to drill home was, like, famously things like Paths of Glory, I'm thinking of. It was the notion that, like, because the general was too far from the front line, he could sort of be frivolous with people's lives because he was just sending an order. The joke in the modern day, dude, is like even modern day soldiers can do that because they're just pressing a button on a drone. Like they don't really have to put the knife to the enemy's throat and stuff it in and have a reason why and a thing. They don't have to have any of the moral philosophy that built up why you have these soldiers and why it was a respected class in society. They've sort of commodified war, if you know what I mean. Like that's become abstract.
Totally true. I mean, there's no doubt, as you said, that conflict and war are fundamental human activities that were almost the exclusive domain of the male up until very recent times. And this is just a fact. And anyone who says otherwise is simply unwilling to face facts. And you're right. Young men and older men as well need to be constantly mindful of these things. I mean, you need to have a connection. You need to know that ultimately, force is the final arbiter of many disputes and always has been. That doesn't mean that, we want to, obviously it doesn't mean that we don't think that, social, behavior is important. That's not what we mean at all. But young guys want to kick ass, to put it in a blunt way. And we've got to cultivate that. And we should be channeling those energies in positive ways to, for the benefit of the country and for the benefit of society. And to me, that's just obvious. And we've always tried to do that, with things like sporting activities or, amateur bouts or, learning about weapons, things like that. But I mean, Jesus, you can't even, guys are being shamed from showing a healthy interest in weapons and war, and I don't think that's right.
One thing I would love to ask you, there's actually one of the big questions I had in mind when I was thinking of even asking you to be a guest on this show, because I feel like you're from an era, and maybe you can answer this. To me, it's genuinely something I just think about a lot. And it's one of those things where I just feel like I go in circles. I never really come to a conclusion. So basically, the premise goes like this, Quintus. On the most literal everyday sense, if I look at institutions, an obvious example would be like the military. So we can pick your military in the US or mine in the UK, right? On the everyday surface level reality of those militaries, I can't in good conscience ever say I would sign up, mate, because when I look at them, these are wars for profit. These are wars where there's no moral reason sometimes for why you're doing something, or even worse, it's inherently immoral and it's some sort of commercial interest you're doing, or some sort of like, it's containment of this particular ideology. So all that jazz, right? The problem is when I think on that level, I actually find the concept of military as an institution abhorrent. But at the same time, when I think of, like in your work, the antiquity and what the soldier was back then, and the concept of the brilliant commander and the general, and the idea of protecting your people and fighting for just causes, right. I can see why these things used to be honor was just dripping from it. Like it was an inherent byproduct that to do these things, you would be someone who, this was your duty. This is something good for your family, for your society. I can see all that in the past. What am I missing about why I can't connect that in the modern day? Or is it essentially possible in the modern day to know those realities, but somehow not sort of, throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you get my analogy?
Yeah. No. Good question. And this is my take on that. There's no question that some of these wars of recent years have questionable or undertaken for questionable reasons, and that's a whole other debate that we can have it obviously at some point. But this is how I see it, and again, you can take it for what it's worth. But it's the best I've been able to come up with. The person who becomes a professional soldier or Marine, he doesn't really think about the political implications of conflict. He basically just goes where he's told. He does what he's told. He doesn't really engage on the geopolitical level. And that may be small consolation to someone who's forced to be there. I understand, but I think it's I think if you look at a lot of the wars of antiquity, and even in the Middle Ages, a lot of them were just done by professional militaries and had very little to do with national survival. They were wars of expeditionary intent and duration. So, it's this. I think it's important to be careful about questioning or picking and choosing your cause. Right. Maybe that's a better word. You got to be very careful about picking and choosing your cause, because, in my view, when you're in there, when you sign up, you do what you're told. You don't have a choice. You don't decide where you want to go. Now, you can privately have an opinion. You can privately think, hey, what the hell am I doing in East Dorkistan? Sure. I don't. But I think we can't condition our performance or our values on where we think we should be. I think the true professional basically says, okay, I'm here, I'm trained, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and that's it. This is what this is my job, this is my duty, and I think our forefathers had that attitude. But you're right. I mean, if you're forced, if you really are pinned down, and if someone say, did you think this was a good idea? Did you think this war was a good? I probably would say probably not. But that's the beauty. That's the thing about that's the beauty of professionalism, is that you do something even if you don't like it, but because you're supposed to, because you have to, and that to me is the mark of a real professional.
Okay, so you're almost like modeling it more like a craft, almost.
Yeah, that's right. I think. Right. Yeah, I think if you look, there's a lot of things, man, that's gone on I'm 54, so I grew up, in the late 70s, 80s, 90s. Okay. The modern military has some very different, some of the things that they're pushing now are things that we would have never dreamed that anybody would even talk about, back when,
Yes.
in the in the 80s or 90s, and we know what they are. But at the same time, and I get this on Twitter a lot. I try to encourage these guys to, because honestly, the military is one of the last places where you can even have a repository of these masculine virtues. That's one of the last, if the last. So I'm not prepared to say, oh, just you give it up. Everything is terrible. Everything is ruined. Don't do that. And, go off to Dorkistan and sell, foam rollers on the internet. I'm not prepared to say that. But I don't. There's unease. Let's put it this way: for an old timer like myself, there's unease that I look upon some of this stuff, and I don't like it, to be perfectly blunt. And all I can say is that I'm hoping it's an aberration. And I also like to think, Thorin, that a lot of this stuff is bullshit. That's the product of peacetime. Lack of focus. I really believe
it'll get whipped into shape basically if something happens.
I really believe that if the balloon went, if you look at what the stupid stuff they were doing in the 1930s, there was a lot of stupid stuff going on.
Right.
And then as soon as the army started marching, everything changed.
Yes.
So we got to have some faith. I think we have to have some faith that a lot of this stupid nonsense that we're seeing now is an aberration that will be thrown out of the window the first time shots are fired in anger. I hope.
Yeah, because another thing I've noticed, again, I'm getting a lot of this sense. I'm someone who's an interviewer, mate. So this is just like my process, how I do it. I get this sense from when I read your thoughts on Twitter and in your work as well. I also get the vibe that you're someone in line with what you just answered, right? Essentially, if I was being cynical, like I said, and I look at an institution, could be the military, could just be something like the education system if you want, right? I might initially be drawn to the cynical take that actually a lot of young people seem to have, which is just like, right, since you've observed bad things about it and it's decaying and you think it's corrupt, you're an idiot if you join it. You're a mark. Like, why would anyone sort of participate in that? But actually, when I think about it, and especially when I've seen the way you frame it, like essentially just because things are shit or people are corrupt, it's not really an excuse for you to give up, is it? Like, I mean, that's essentially right. What you were talking about there was, even if as a soldier you are just someone who's working at the craft of being excellent at killing people, you could, within the domain of being an individual soldier, act with honor. You could save your countrymen. You could do something brave. I mean, even someone who is some sad teacher working for minimum wage in the school system, mate, the impact they could have on like 5 kids' lives in their class, that could change everything for those kids. Like in a way, like you should sort of suck it up, right? And just do a good job anyway, even if it is shit. That's right. That's exactly my point. And I think there's a tendency that we have, that a lot of guys on Twitter have, and this is you must notice this too, man, there's a constant effort to focus on the negative instead of the positive. Yes. And the negative is often just not representative of what's really happening. I mean, you can't look. There's no question that there are some trends that I've noticed in the military that I don't think are good. But those are not major reasons to write off the entire institution and to just throw everything out the window and say. I think a lot of times guys do that because for different reasons. I think it's maybe trendy to be cynical and negative. Sure. And that's just part of the way youth is. You have to kind of give them room to vent a little bit. Yes. And then you have to sort of gently try to bring up the other side of the argument. So, man, like you said, it all comes down to, you just got to keep going. You just got to keep rolling forward. You got to keep, being an example and doing things the best way you can, because there's no other option. There isn't any other option, I thought as a last topic, I could ask you a question where it can either be informed, your answer, by antiquity, philosophy, or just your own experience. So essentially, this is the question, right? In life, I actually have an approach that I'm very transparent about. Like, I'm one of those people who in my work, I just break the fourth wall all the time. I tell people what I'm doing I'm even doing it now in the interview. That's the joke, but you get the premise. So I just kind of tell people how I'm going to do things because I just find it sets the expectations better. So basically, one thing I always say in my actual work, I won't make this claim in my personal life, I'm not a saint, but in my professional work, which at this point in time I've been employed for 21 years in my field, I have never told a lie. And that is something that I consider a fact that I could prove. No one's ever been able to show otherwise. Obviously, there are times where they'll show I was wrong about something, but again, if you know what a lie is, that's not really the intention at all behind what I've said. So what I would say is this, right? I actually think, even though in general I would say this strategy works quite well, I would say I think people would probably be shocked by how well it works to just tell the truth all the time. There are obvious downsides, and there are times especially where you sort of play into your enemy's hands. So what I would ask, again, can be informed by whatever background you want, is am I being naive by not using lying as a strategy? Like, are there times where, like for you, is truth or telling the truth some sort of moral paragon that you must aspire to alter? What do you think on this topic? What would you say?
Oh, I totally agree with you, Thorin. No, you should always tell the truth. I mean, and I'll give you my reasons. I mean, this is a great question. And when you tell the truth, I don't remember who said this, but I heard it somewhere. Once you tell the truth, then I think it was Sean Connery actually. Once you tell the truth, it becomes the other guy's problem.
That would be a great Sean Connery line, I've got to say.
That's the type of thing he would have said.
Yes.
Right? Once you tell the truth, then it becomes the other guy's problem. In other words, the monkey, it's almost like it's a relief of a burden. You take the monkey off your back and you stick it onto the other guy's back in some ways. The other reason is you don't have, when you tell the truth, you don't have to keep track of all these, you don't have to keep track of all these lies that people are inclined to tell. The other reason is that it's always going to be found out. People aren't stupid, and when you lie about things, and this is one thing I've learned from meeting with clients for 22 years, you can't lie to people. They can tell. They can just read experience on your face or in your body language and the way you talk. They know. So you can't really bullshit people. You can't. And the same thing about things you've done in your life. Never, especially with the internet. I made a point of when I started, do not ever claim, credits that you did not earn. Don't ever take credit for merits that you gained or don't take credit for things that you never did.
Yes.
Don't lie. Because people will always find out. Chances are there's always going to be somebody out there who knows more about it than you do, is going to be able to detect it. Now, of course, we always make mistakes, and I've made mistakes. I've said things that were factually inaccurate, but you quickly admit it and correct it.
Yes.
And people will appreciate it, because frankly, all we have, Thorin, and I think in your field, my understanding, your journalism field, all you have is your credibility. The same thing with me as a lawyer. As a lawyer and as a writer, the only thing I have is my integrity. And if I lie, and if I get caught lying to these guys, you're done. You're fucking done. No one is going to respect you. No one is going to trust you. No one is going to respect you. People will forgive almost anything. People will forgive mistakes, or you got this wrong or that wrong, or you missed and everybody makes mistakes. But if you blatantly misrepresent something, then that goes to credibility, that goes to integrity, and then the issue becomes, okay, well, what else is he lying about? And this is what really angers me about a lot of our elected officials and other public figures. They just lying becomes so instinctive to them. They just don't know they just can't tell the difference anymore.
Yes.
So I don't know. So no, I think it's a great policy. I think it's what we should all aspire to. It's a goal that we all try to reach, and look, no one's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, here and there. but I think ultimately people can tell if you're acting in good faith or not. I mean, ultimately, people are not stupid. People are maybe I don't want to say smart as a collective, but people have a sense of when you're basically a good person, and I think people will make allowances for that. So man, just keep it up, keep doing what you're doing.
Here on my side channel, I of course explore my non-esports interests, but the increased amount of videos that I'm able to put out and about however many topics is in large part thanks to the following people: ppnomula, Realm. Now, do you want to choose the topic that I focus on next out of a series of them? Maybe you want to ask a question for my next AMA. There'll be a thread coming real soon after the first one. Would you like teasers to find out who the upcoming guests are for Thorinquiry? Maybe you want to take part in a private, never-to-be-published discussion with yours truly. Well, if so, then heed this call to action and join Thorin's side today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box below.